Hello everyone and welcome back to a Jed Bedrock Aviation video. I do have something to say before I start. I did not realize how much work these videos take to make, so it caught me a little off guard, and that's why this one has been such a long while in the making. As well as I'm going to start pumping them out as fast as I can because they all build off of each other. And then I'm also going to go over a few topics that I was going to have separate videos over. So this video is going to be kind of the conglomeration of 2 to 3 to 4 videos all together is what I'll cover in this video. So let's get into it. If you are using a HOTUS hands-on stick and throttle, then you're going to have to set up special controls for that within War Thunder. The model I'm using here is the Thrustmaster T.16000M, I believe is how it's said. It's the common one that you get. Most people buy it because it's stripped down, affordable, very good for the money. I really enjoy it. What you want to do is when you get here, you go to controls, and it brings you here. So you want to go down to have these like control save states. I don't know the actual name for them, but you go down here and hit export to file. It will bring up this screen, and then you name it. So you name your thing and then you save it. Once it's saved, then you can play around with it. Though I would recommend saving your mouse and keyboard thing setup before continuing. So like I have mouse and keyboard set up here, and I have it here, I can save it. So what you can do is you can either import a control file that you want to use, or you can export. When you export, you bring it here and then you save, and you want to replace it, yes. So you're saving over your modifications to make sure that when you switch off of it, all your changes will apply. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to import my joystick setup. That's what I've made and saved for my Thrustmaster. So I've imported it. And as you can see here, I have switched to realistic controls for this import. Now, as I go through this, I'll be showing you guys pictures of the actual Thrustmaster. This isn't, I'm not saying this is how you should do it. This is how I personally do it, and what works for me. I'll slowly go through all the controls for my aviation and what works. So, the virtual instructor for realistic instructor is off. You want auto trim on, because if you don't, it is miserable. Now, if you're doing sim, auto trim will not be on, but I only fly in realistic, so I don't do sim. So auto trim can be on. Movement. Now, when you're on this, when you're flying VR, there are some things that will still be bound to your mouse and keyboard that you won't be using, but they'll kind of be there left over. So this doesn't matter. This is your mouse wheel. This is specifically for your mouse that you're not going to be using. So these two things here don't matter. What you want is your throttle axis, and you can come and click on it. So this is where, as you can see, I have the two things are going back and forth. Now, the throttle, for the throttle on the Thrustmaster at least, the physical and logical axes are different. They go in different directions. And so what you want for at least my Thrustmaster throttle is that when the throttle is all the way open, the physical axis is all the way to the left. When the throttle is all the way closed, it's all the way to the right. I will explain the physical and logical axes in a minute, but just for now, we're only focusing on the red physical axis. So closed is to the right, open is to the left, and that's what you want. And in the middle is 50%. So, and if you're having issues, you don't know what the axis is called, because you click on this and you have all these axes, you can go to auto detect axis. So if I go to not assigned and auto detect, and I start moving my axis, it's going to auto detect movement, and it will automatically apply to that. So that's how you can auto detect axes. And then you can have dead zones and stuff. Yeah, it just goes back and forth. This is where you can play with it, where if you don't want your throttle to be, if you want it to be non-linear, or if you want to invert it. If I don't invert it, you have issues where your throttle is flipped. So initially it won't be like that, but if you invert it, then your throttle will act properly. So you want it inverted for the throttle. It's odd, but that's just what it needs to be. Otherwise, the logical axis, which is what the game actually uses, is not where it needs to be for the throttle. Relative control, that's for other things, multiplier, correction. Throttle's pretty basic for the throttle axis. Then you have hold throttle for wet. So I do have this, and on the Thrustmaster, basically what it does is right before you reach the full apex of your full throttle, it will reach 100%, and if you push it just that tiniest bit more, it'll go into WEP. So like if you're wanting to come out of WEP, you can just kind of like slightly nudge your throttle backwards and it will come out of WEP. So that's why I have hold for WEP. So it's nice. I haven't really experimented with it off, but I just really liked it on. Roll, pitch, and yaw. So these are important axes because this has to do with the actual control of your airplane. You're rolling, and you're up, and you're down, and you're side to side. Yaw axis is your rudder. Pitch is your elevator, and roll are your ailerons. If you go in here, it's the same thing. So this is my roll axis. So when you pitch your when you pull your stick from left to right, you want it to follow that. Now this is where these three controls are where you really start to play with personal preference of how you want your plane to be controlled. And actually, I won't go too in depth for this because it's so specific to the person flying, but certain planes fly with certain sensitivities, and these are the three controls that you really change to get that feel. So here I have a dead zone of 0.7. The physical axis you can see moves around, and that's because of that dead space that I was talking about in the stick. You can see it moves around, and I've changed this dead space to 0.07. What the dead zone is it's the amount of movement that you can have on your physical stick before the game actually registers that you're moving your stick. So the red physical axis is what your stick is actually doing. The green logical axis is what the game says that your stick is doing. So if I went to invert axis here, when I rolled to the left, it would roll me to the right, because that logical axis is going off to the right. So I would roll in the opposite direction. Just so you know, you don't want that inverted, unless you're going for some sort of challenge. So, that's the dead zone I'm comfortable with. If your Thrustmaster has a much smaller dead zone of the actual stick jiggling around, like I'm like jiggling the stick back and forth, and you can see that dead zone. So that's just something you play with, and it can vary between how your stick was made, whether it has that dead zone or not. And then I have the multiplier to 1. You can make it non-linear, so like if I were to change this to 1, let's just drastic go to 2 for the point of this. Basically what happens is when you move your stick, the game will take longer to register it, and so the more you move your stick, like I've moved it halfway to the left, and the game has said that I barely move the stick. But the more I move it, then the game quickly catches up. So to put that in perspective, your plane will start to very slowly roll, and then once you hit enough on your stick, your plane will just start to roll really fast. So you'll start out slow, and then you'll snap into a roll really quickly. So if you made that like even more drastic, you could change your stick. You have to go almost all the way, and then it just starts rolling your plane drastically. If you're someone that has a hard time being gentle on the stick, especially in high stress situations, this can be beneficial because it means that your actions are very deliberate when you're rolling. So if you're like shaking in your stick, you're slopping your stick all over the place, you can use this non-linearity to make sure that the plane doesn't start freaking out as you are freaking out. So I personally keep this to 1. I like the plane. I'm very gentle on the stick, even when I'm being shot at. So it depends on what you want. And you can also play with it. So obviously you can change it. So if you have a hard time being drastic on the stick, then you get better, you can come back and change this. So, but for me, I keep it at 1. I like the plane to do as much as I want it to. Multiplier is 1. This is just how drastic your movements are. You can actually make I believe this makes the logical axis, yeah, it'll overshoot. So basically, this exaggerates your movements. Instead of making it not as exaggerated, this exaggerates it. So, there's that. And then correction, I'm not exactly sure what this does. Oh, yeah. So if you have a stick that's old or slightly broken, and the logical axis is not working properly, then you can use correction to, within the game, change where it's supposed to be. So that is a nice feature I like. And again, for all of the axes, you turn on, this will be not assigned. You turn on auto detect, and then you move your stick to one side or the other. And now, right now I'm moving the stick up and down. And that's very common when you're like side to side or going up and down. There's usually a little slop in either direction. And so that's another reason for the dead zone. So you make sure that you're very deliberate. So we can go okay here and pitch. So this is your up and down, and this is really where it matters for a lot of planes. if you're trying to fly a Spitfire, which I recommend you not to, but if you're trying to, and I have done, the pitch, when you pitch, it puts the aircraft up or down. This is insanely sensitive in the Spitfire. You will instantly stall yourself out in a flat spin if you do not have this calibrated for the Spitfire specifically. Like I said, some planes require specific tampering of these axes to get good performance. It's very personal. For me, this is the same as that I had it for the roll, because I usually fly German and American planes, and they're very stable planes, and for the most part, unless I hit one that's different, you can get away with having your pitch and roll at about the same settings. You can also use this saving technique down here to make different control sets for different planes, so you don't have to change it every time. So yaw is interesting. So I do not have a pedal system. I am using the yaw paddles that are on the front of the Thrustmaster throttle. And these are interesting. Its movement is so little that, as you can see when you're going back and forth, the logical axis moves really fast from side to side. And when you're in a high stress situation, using your rudder can get you killed with this little paddle here, because it's so sensitive. And it's just your fingers. You can just lay on it, gives full rudder, and you just flip or tear your plane apart. So what I've done here is I've given it a small dead zone, because it doesn't really need one since it returns back to its original state. But I have given it a non-linearity. So like I have to be I can be more gentle on it, and it doesn't, or I can be more drastic on it, and it doesn't give me as exaggerated controls. So this is what I do, because this paddle's so small and light. Obviously, if you have pedals, it's going to be different for you. I suggest you play around with it in a test flight, but for the paddle specifically, this is what I use, and it works pretty well. And the auto detect axis also works for this, and it'll tell you if it's on your throttle. So this was rudder, elevator, ailerons. So roll sensitivity, these are how sensitive those controls are. These are separate from the controls that you did within those axes. This is more of a general sensitivity. I have them at 100 personally, because I feel it's more real. I want my controls to be more instant, because what the sensitivity does is, if you have the virtual pilot on in the game, when you pull up on your stick, the sensitivity determines how fast the virtual pilot in the game actually moves the stick. So the airplane will lag behind your physical controls in real life. I have these at 100 because I want the plane to react the instant I make the control. I just feel it's more real, and I like it. Thrust vector, hover height, don't need these, especially for World War II planes. I believe this is a jet thing. I don't even have jets, so it doesn't matter. Don't do that. Force feedback, this is if you have a stick or something that has haptics. Let's see, wing sweep, okay, flaps. So, the when it comes to remembering your buttons, you have to, the C2 is your throttle, C1 is your stick base. So when you see the C2 button 2, it's saying that that button is button 2 on my throttle. And I'm actually going to change this here for you guys, because when you're in some maneuvers, you need to have the ability to lower your flaps at different settings and then raise them. When you use a button to toggle flaps, it will only toggle the flaps in the configuration that your plane is in. So if you're landing gear up and you hit that button, it may only lower your combat flaps and raise them, and that's all it will do. But for some planes that don't have combat flaps, it won't lower the flaps at all, and you won't be able to do anything. And the game requires that you lower your landing gear to lower flaps to take off and landing. Those are the only ones you have. So I am going to unbind this, click on it, remove binding, and I'm going to bind a different button for raising and lowering the flaps. So I want this to be flaps down. So I bound it to this button. And I'll show you what button I'm binding it to, because a lot of the buttons on the throttle have 2 to 4 positions on them. So you can go down and up. So I bound it to button 5, which is the button in the picture, but I'm pushing it down. And then flaps up is button 4, which is the same one, but I'm pulling it up instead of pushing it down. So in this scenario, if you want to lower and raise flaps, you push it down as many times as you want the flaps to go down, and then you push it up to reset all of that. And so you have way more control of your flaps on a more ergonomic button. Air brake, thrust reversal, don't need that. Toggle gear, I just have that, I believe I have that set to this button next to the flaps, button 3. Now for the brakes, this is left brake and right brake for your airplane wheels. I have these toggled to the little thing you see. I'll show you here. I have my brake so that when that's all the way up, the brake turns on. When it's all the way down, the brakes turn off. There is no in between. That would be used for your throttle if you don't have the throttle set up here. If you have just the stick base, then that's usually meant for your throttle. But because I do have the throttle base, I decided I can put my brake on there, because I really didn't know what else to put them on. When it comes to weaponry, it really depends on what you want. But you have your small caliber guns, your large caliber guns, and your additional guns. I'm not exactly sure what it means by additional guns, because I've never had guns that don't fire with this setup, so I'm not exactly sure what it means. But with your small caliber guns, I have my additional and small caliber on the actual trigger, the firing trigger on the front of the stick that your pointer finger sits on. And I have large caliber guns also attached to that. So the idea is that you can have them completely separate, but when I pull the trigger to fire, all the guns on my plane fire off, because I'm behind someone, the shot is lined up, I'm going to take it. Then I also have large caliber guns bound to button 2. And the point of that is that if I don't want to use, and I'm probably going to change this, if I don't want to use any of my guns, I just want to fire off one cannon shot, then I can press button 2 and just the cannons fire off and none of my other guns fire. It's a way to conserve machine gun ammo, and you can also split it up so that your machine guns fire only with one button and your cannons fire with another, and then when you push them both at the same time, all your guns roar off. I tried that, and for me personally, I don't care for it, because I don't like having to push 2 buttons simultaneously while trying to also line up a shot with the stick while it's moving and all that. I like to focus on pulling the one trigger and all my guns fire off. That's what personally works for me, but you can bind it to other things. So, let's see. So, let's clear this. And so, I can double click it, pull on my trigger, you can double click it again, and push button 2. And it will bind those. Heck, you could have 3 or 4 bindings hooked up to this, as far as I know. But that's just what works for me. It's good when flying something like the P-39, where you have your big nose cannon. You can just be behind someone and tap the cannon button, and just your cannon fires off one shot. And I've gotten kills that way. You don't have to unload all of your weapons in one shot. It helps to kind of conserve cannon ammo when you only want to fire off your cannon just once. And the button, you can just tap it and it will fire off one shot. Boom, go right there. I have acrobatic smoke bound to 6, so that's the one next to 7. These are the indented buttons on the left side of the HOTAS. And then I have my open cockpit button. This is more of a novelty button. It will open and close on its own when you're taking off and landing. But me personally, I like to have it turn on a bindable button. Just, because sometimes you can have fun with it. Like in certain 109s, you can just pop the cockpit. Or if you want to be, like, if you're in a plane that allows you to pop the cockpit, you can, like, especially since you're in VR, like, pop the cockpit and then hold the jet eject button. So, it's more realistic for that. And so I have that bound to button 11. And then cockpit lighting. So cockpit lighting is really nice, especially for VR when you get darker maps, or if you're doing test flights in the dark, like I like to do sometimes. It's really relaxing to do a moonlit nighttime flight, maybe with some rain. So I have the cockpit lighting to button 12, and it's really nice having that bound. I mean, these are things you don't really need bound, but they're kind of quality of life things that are nice. The next one, and it looks like the last one, is manual engine control. This is exceptionally good for when you are in or landing, because when you're landing, if you turn off the engine, it makes your landing better, because you don't, especially when you're applying brake, because if you have your engine turned off, it's just going to be spinning the prop from the air coming through, and it's not going to be continually pulling your plane forward aside from momentum. So it's nice to have a toggle engine button done. You can also do prop feathering, which is more of a bomber thing, which is why I don't have it bound. So is the extinguisher. So those are more bomber and strike aircraft things than they are like fighter things. Okay, and so when you go to exit, it is going to scream at you that you don't have all of these things bound. And it is just a list of stuff. And if you're only doing World War II fighter planes, these are things you don't have to care about. You just continue anyway. And that's when you leave. And if you want to save it, what you do, you go to here, and you do to export to file. It should already auto-select what you have, save, and it replaces it. And it keeps all of your savings that you had. So if you don't do that, the next time you boot up the game, or if you switch back to your mouse and keyboard, it is going to clear that stuff, and you don't want that. And so now we're going to go on to the next section, which is also important, but it's not directly correlated to actually operating your aircraft, but letting you talk to your allies. Now this is under common in the controls. We were at aircraft, now we're on common. So this is where you use a lot of the buttons that are on the side of your throttle, and where you bind some of the buttons for your stick. This will also depend on whether you're in VR or not, because some of these change. And this is just my personal setup. You can have it differently, but this is just what I have. Tactical map, I have that bound to my stick. It's on the right side. I have the statistics on 14 and the tactical map on 15. And that allows me to bring those up while I am in my aircraft. And then the leave vehicle I have on 16. So in VR, it does not show you the countdown timer when you hold the eject button. So you have to hold it and just have faith that it's counting down. Zoom camera, I have that actually bound to button 3 on the stick. It's the one I'll show you in the picture. That's button 3. This is where the buttons on the side of the throttle come in. I have bound them to the throttle C2. So this is what I have for talking to my allies while in VR. On my throttle, I can hit them while in flight without even thinking about it with my thumb. Now for jets and stuff, you may want to use those controls on the side of your throttle for other things. But for mainly only doing World War II, I bind them to talking to my teammates. And so I have on button 2 C7, I have thank you, I have sorry, well done, affirmative, returning to base. These are things that it's like on the top one, I have things like thank you and sorry and well done and affirmative. And on the bottom one, I have things like returning to base bound there. And so I have like my top one is like giving, it's like replying and giving commands. And then my bottom thing is for like updating my team for what's going on. So those are things I like to use those side buttons for. And then reset tracking position. This is vital for VR. I think it's vital for head tracking as well, but mainly it's for VR. And for this, what will happen when you get in a new aircraft is that your headset doesn't know where it is in correlation with the real world and War Thunder. So when you spawn in, let's say, a German 109 for the first time after opening the game, your camera could either be outside the canopy or in the guy's crotch, basically. is the idea, or you could just be, you know, inside the tail of the aircraft. By pressing and holding this button until the camera resets, will reset your head where it's supposed to be in the airplane. And in VR, especially in German planes, this feels really weird because the little crosshair, the holographic thing inside the planes for where to aim, in German planes they're for the right eye, and so it looks like you're off center, but you're not. And you can also play with these. If you feel like your head's not where it's supposed to be in the cockpit, you can move your head around a little bit in real life and get it calibrated to just the way you want. So, alright, that's gonna do it for this video. I know this one was a long one, but I have compressed about 2 to 4 videos into one because they were all around the same topic. So instead of making a bunch of shorter videos, I just made one long one. And the next video is going to be talking about flight models. Flight models are very important in War Thunder, and they can be the difference between a good time and a very, very rough time when flying with a stick. So that's what the video will be about next time, so you guys can look forward to that. And thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.